Welcome to a short video summary of the Sony KD65 XE9005. You can read the actual review via the link in the description or by clicking the info button at the top right of the screen. The XE9005 or XE90 is a mid-range Ultra HD 4K LCD TV. It uses a 65-inch screen size and it retails for £2,500. Unusually for a mid-range Sony TV, it uses a direct LED backlight. It also includes local dimming and high dynamic range support, specifically HDR 10, and it includes Android TV. In terms of its design, it's very similar to last year's Sony TVs. It has a minimalist appearance with an 8mm wide black bezel around the screen itself, and at the bottom centre of the screen there's the Sony logo, and beneath that there's a light, an LED light, that you can, if you want to, turn off. The TV sits on an attractive stand with a brushed silver metal sloped front to it, and there are support columns at the rear. The panel is actually attached to these columns, giving the impression that the screen is floating in mid-air. If you look at the rear of the TV itself, you'll see that along with these support columns, there are spaces inside which allow you to run cables through for tidier cable management. On the left-hand side, as you face the rear of the TV, you'll see the connector for the power cable. And this TV, like last year's XE93, uses a power adapter. So bear that in mind if you're thinking of wall mounting this TV, although if you are thinking of wall mounting this TV, it uses the standard 300 by 300 Visa wall bracket. On the right-hand side of the panel, as you're facing the rear, you'll see all the connections. And there's a combination of rearwards and sideways facing connections. The rearwards facing connections are predominantly legacy connections, so you have composite and component video, analog. You also have optical digital output, and you have one single HDMI input facing rearwards. All the other connections face sideways. Here you'll find 3 more HDMI inputs, along with 3 USB ports, a headphone jack, an Ethernet port, and there are twin tuners for both satellite and terrestrial television. In terms of controlling this TV, it uses the same controller as last year, and it's a relatively attractive and well-designed remote control, comfortable to hold in the hand, easy to use with one hand, and sensibly laid out. Any possible complaint would be that it has this rubberized feel to it, and the buttons are quite low down against that, making them difficult to feel in a darkened room, and sometimes you do end up hitting the wrong button or it doesn't quite press correctly. But overall though, it's a reasonably well-designed remote control, and there is the option for voice control as well. As you'd expect with a Sony TV, it uses the Android Smart TV platform. And it's a very well-designed platform. In the past, we have had some issues with bugs and dropouts and crashes on this platform with Sony TVs. I have to say, on the XE90, no issues at all whatsoever with Android TV so far, so that's good news. It seems more robust than on previous years. But as before, there is a series of tiles. You scroll down through them and then across through the different options, starting at the top with recommendations. And as you go down, you have things like various apps. You have video on demand services like Netflix, of course, and Amazon, BBC iPlayer. You've also got YouView in there and all the catch-up services. And then you go further down, there's games options, and there's also menu options along the bottom as well. As always, we tested this television using our calibration equipment, specifically the Klein K10A colorimeter, the Meridio Fresco 6G pattern generator, and Calman calibration software. Out of the box, it was reasonably good, but slightly disappointing as well in terms of its grayscale performance. There was a bit too much blue in the grayscale. This was applicable to all the different options we tried for grayscale. They all had too much blue in them. The least amount of excess blue was in the Expert 1 or Expert 2 settings, so use that ideally. But we did have a little bit too much blue in there. Now, this TV has both a 2 and a 10-point white balance control, so it was relatively easy to remove all that blue and get a nice, accurate grayscale. Looking at the color performance, this TV, as with all Sony TVs, does not have a color management system. So initially, with the excess blue and the grayscale, you can see that white was skewed towards blue and was dragging the 2 secondary colors of cyan and magenta along with it. However, once we calibrated the grayscale, the color accuracy was very good. It wasn't perfect, but it was very good, and also it tracked very well against 25, 50 and 75% saturation points. So in terms of the grayscale and color accuracy for standard dynamic range, it was very good. In terms of the HDR performance, equally is impressive. In terms of the grayscale, very good. The The TV tracked the PQEOTF very precisely, and we got about 900 nits of peak brightness out of it. So not enough for 1,000 nits, which would qualify for Ultra HD Premium certification, but about 936 nits in an accurate calibrated mode. In terms of the colour performance, wasn't quite as good. It didn't track Rep 2020 as well as it should. It did track DCI P3 within Rep 2020 quite well, although it wasn't perfect, but certainly we've seen a lot worse in the past. And so overall, considering it doesn't have a colour management system, this was a very good performance across both standard dynamic range and high dynamic range content. In terms of its input lag, well, in its game mode, we measured it at 32 milliseconds, and importantly, this TV has game modes for both SDR and HDR gaming. So if you are an HDR gamer, you can also enjoy that low input lag even when you're HDR gaming. In terms of the picture performance overall, very impressive. Obviously, the use of a direct LED backlight meant that it could be both bright but also deliver an even performance across the whole screen. Pleasingly, there was no obvious columns or banding on the TV, probably because it doesn't actually have that many zones behind the screen. We actually only counted 20. However, it's well applied and the local dimming is effective, and certainly we found the picture quality to be excellent with standard dynamic range content. Colour accuracy was very good, motion handling was good, which is always a strong point with Sony TVs, so when watching things like football it was excellent. Most impressively though was with high dynamic range content, because of course by having a direct LED backlight it's not trying to light the panel from the edges as would be from an edge-lit TV. So you had a much more even performance with HDR content. You had none of these bright edges or bright black bars on, say, letterbox films. Overall, it delivered a very impressive HDR performance. Of course, the XE90 isn't perfect. It uses a VA panel, so it has excellent black levels for an LCD TV, but it does have a very narrow optimal viewing angle. Also, it uses the X1 processor, not the X1 Extreme processor, which means unlike some other Sony TVs this year, it won't be upgraded to Dolby Vision later in the year. However, when you consider its design, its performance, its features and its price, it's an excellent performer, and we are more than happy to award the Sony KD65, XE9005 and AV Forum's recommended badge. Thanks for watching.